Hi guys, it's I'm going to do a session on UI and UX design, something that I worked on at PwC. So basically, it was something that I did last year, and it was looking at this application called iPower. Okay, so basically the brief there was they had an existing application. I believe it was like something like Win client. It hadn't been web-based. I've had many of those where I've had to convert things like from a Microsoft Win client to something that was web-based using Bootstrap libraries, Bootstrap interface, so all the things like templates and all that sort of stuff. And so, so the brief was to create screens, existing, I guess the functionality was probably existing maybe 86%, and then I had to enhance some of the functionalities using some of the designs that I put together in Bootstrap. So not just visual. Initially, I put stuff together in Balsamiq, and then ultimately I moved it to something else, to obviously straight HTML5 code with the CSS. It was like all the looking at things like the branding, all that sort of stuff. And so the brief was to create an interface that could go from one platform to another. So that would work on mobile, tablets, and desktop. And so basically, what I had to work on was things like tabs, selected item styles, desktop, and mobile styles. Yeah, so looking at things like areas, say like how tiles would look like in terms of, say, like tiles and details, how those tiles would look if they were rows in columns. So columns being the noun, the I guess what the actual type of information it is, and then obviously you've got the input. So you've got to think of the type, so like things like names, numbers, account managers, and then the input is like their name, and so on. So it was really playing with how much information you can put on a page. Could you put, say, like up to 6 accounts on a page as a tile, and same utilization of, say, like things like the looking at the real estate there, you could put a lot more rows depending on how you want to display the work. Things like we had to also think of things like expenses and bills, and things like financial reviews and all those sorts of things, and what was pending, things like that. Extra information that could come out from below the tile, and utilize that information that actually goes up. Other things like where the side navigation would be, how side navigation would look in terms of rollover state, selected state. Same with mobiles, using how the mobile will be treated. So, for instance, what a selected state would be, what an unselected state would be, all those sorts of things. So, also looking at things like approval modules, looking at transaction modules, in terms of what needs to be required for approval, selecting transactions, rejecting transactions, approving transactions, rejecting transactions. So it's really looking at what they called a happy scenario. So and looking at those scenarios, happy path scenario, Every organisation looks at these things. I sort of see them as more a scenario, user scenario, and what it's like problem solving. How a particular scene or a page would, be, and how it reacts in terms of, I guess, the functionalities within Bootstrap, what you can do in terms of the widgets. So things like that. So it's quite interesting. And I was looking also things like, I think it was like, looking at the icons at Awesome, Fonts Awesome. So look, I'm really seeing what the developers thought. So really getting into the developers' heads, and looking at also the BA, the business analyst heads, and me being the designer in the middle, really making a difference, for an organisation like that, and making sure that whatever I designed over the years, it would keep, and they wouldn't have to redesign it. Probably in another, for at least another, at least 2-3 years from now. So yeah, having a look at different like styles. I've got a PDF there describing the different icons, what the icons are about. Other things like, for instance, if you log in as someone, what you would be seeing, all those sorts of things. So looking at things like what the selected bar would look. There'd be things like a workflow icon on that selected bar. There's also things like action, drop-down menu, other things like you've got things like modal windows, what people tend to call light box windows. Modal windows, because obviously in Bootstrap they're called modals. Other things like, whoops, going, I just got me light here, but so basically this is good. Okay, so basically looking at things like approval transaction results, rejected transactions, and other reasons. So there might be a reason within the modal box or a prompt box. So really looking at and also what the rejection reason would look if it's within the rows and columns. How it would look also within the tiles. So looking at things like labels and inputs, as I said, and heights and widths. These were things that obviously we had to work around. Things like we were looking at things like my approval, my engagements, what we called system searches. Other things like save searches, where the user can access the top saved searches, which is a pretty cool idea. Really like that. Then you've got delegated searches, so users can access and share searches with other colleagues. So this is a really good system. This is within like things like engagement sections of the site. So looking at things like save searches. So I think it's kind of like their favourite save searches. So what I was really struggling with at the time was things like icons. What do you put in? So the more and more I'm looking at the industry, we've got favourite searches or save searches as love hearts and things like that. So they're the sorts of things that we're looking at. And things like looking at previous searches with other colleagues. So it's all within the system searches. People are doing that a lot more frequently now. Things like tile view, or how they view the data as a tile, or do they view it as a row. You got things like how people, as I said, whether you're logging in. If you're a director, you'd see your line manager's information. If you're a line manager, you can't see the director's information, but you can see that you're being managed by a director. Things like that. Those systems have been in a lot of the SAP reporting tools and screens that I've used in the past for Telstra. Yeah, so looking at things like and looking at the search options. So we're looking at magnifying icon search page when it's open, selecting a document type, prover's name, clicking search and search results. So really looking at those breakdowns, seeing search for prover's name, those sorts of things, clicking search. And having all these preset criteria, things like different filters before you actually click the search to get different results, depending on the what you wanted to search. So you've got things like looking at how you can view things like other content. So in this case, it was financial journals. All those sorts of things. There were other things that I was looking at, things like collapsed options, numbering document types, gear options, saved search options, tile options, maximize window options. At the end, I think they didn't really want to use the maximize window option. They wanted to utilize pretty much the main window rather than putting everything in a modal box. They preferred to actually use the main one. The modal box was mainly used, but not in minimized mode. So you still had like the background still showing, nothing maximized. So it was pretty much. I think we went down that way so that we wouldn't have to use. I guess use as many options and having double, I guess doubling up with things like menu bars and all that sort of stuff, and it was also less clickables and all those sorts of things. I still think it would have probably worked pretty good, like having those the option of actually having maximized window options with the modal window. Other things that what we looked at going through, they're pretty much standardized things. Other things that I really liked was how to actually customize what you had in your modal window. I like this thing that I came up with, and it was like with the modal window, where you can actually group the information by grouping, and you can group things like action, description, other things like what else was there? So with the columns, you can actually select what you wanted to see, because for instance, there might be like 18 columns across, and you can't fit everything all on the 18 columns all on the one screen without actually scrolling across to see. For instance, you might see like about 10 columns, and then the other 8 you've got to scroll across to see things. What I came up with was with a modal window where you can actually you can pre-select what you wanted to see, so that you can put information up against each other, and then you can actually pretty much view everything all on the one page. I guess obviously if you're going to be able to pick 10 and leave it as 10, and then obviously you've got 8 hidden things, you can always go back and reconfigure what you wanted to see. So I think it's really mainly having that usability, or user focused thing, where you could say as a user you wanted to put information up against other parts of information, so that if you wanted to do an analysis of something, you could pick what columns would correspond to, say, like a particular grouping, so it'd be up against that information. So it worked very well, because what they wanted something that would fit very well on an iPad, say like on a laptop. it was quite tricky coming up with that for the mobile phone, but we did manage to get something there that corresponded with the different levels of each account and things, who was in charge of the different accounts and stuff. So it's a very challenging project. This project lasted 3 months, and I was the first to actually come up with this, or I was the first to actually be one of the designers. So it was very challenging. Other things like I had to show. Whoops. Okay. So basically, I had also looked at things like gear options, which is more got to do with things like configuration options. That's why they've used the gear icon as a configuration option. You've got tile options that I went through. So I was looking at the CSS and the branding. I had to keep the branding very much like the PwC branding. So things had to be in the black. They had to be in the orange. I really wanted to keep it in a lighter orange and the white. I didn't want to go anywhere in the red. I know that there is a sort of a deeper orangey sort of red. It looked very, it just didn't look very good. So I had to keep it quite clean and quite. I had to really work on it, and also the eye power. At one stage, I think they were going to get rid of it and just call it power, and then they put the eye power back, and it used to be called eye power. So I pulled it back to power, and then they said, "Oh, it's just a bit pretty full on." So then also, I made things like side menus. This for the mobile phone, looking at things like modules, proposals. You got things like relationships, work in progress, administration, admin approvals, references, custom searches, and looking at security. So many areas in this application. It was really coming up with interface that was easy to get to. I was looking at a lot of the Google widgets and Google interfaces, really looking at things like Hangout and all these other interfaces. I thought, this is a company that look at that sort of design, even though they wanted to stay clear away from Salesforce. It was sort of a mix between a Salesforce and a SAP application, but a bit more cooler, very googly interface. So it was quite cool. I really enjoyed working on this project. Looking at things like approvals. So you got the debtor, you got the job, you got things like target billing, you got finance journals, and then you got expenses, transfers. So they really had, we were looking at more at the icons, the colors. I tried a lot of the Google type colors, as opposed to looking at the Google colors, but at the same time, not hindering the colors of the organization. So they had to work together, but colors that were not too dark, quite light, but quite fresh and very sharp. They were very happy with the results. We tried to keep things very simple. What the thing was, a lot of the icons based stuff. So many of the icons, as I said, they came from Fonts Awesome. It's easier for the developers to implement those things. So looking at the placement of things like accounts. So the account could be, in this case, it was CBA, and you had the things like status. You had to you think of things like what it actually was. So was it a financial journal? Commonwealth Bank. You had things like numbers. You had things like prices, dates, all those sorts of things. So what the status was, whether it was, whether it was live, whether it was on or off, or green, or was it yellow? All these type of things. Things where you had other screens. We had like bubble navigations on the bottom, like the Google, or so like something like what you'd find in mobile, the Messenger, so like Facebook Messenger. And so what you'd have is have things like a pop-up screen, prove, draft, submit, or verify. So even if you were on the bus, you can actually do all the approvals and all that, but without looking in too much detail of each account. So it's quite good. So it was very mobile based wherever you were, and you can get a decent amount of information from each account. So we drilled in a few things. I had to show things like the 18 different document types. What else did I have to show? So things like rows and grid styles. What else? Yeah, just a lot of different things. We had things like billing, non-billing, adjusted notes, so many things, engagement, budget rates, and I had to show and represent everything. Things like from expenses, billing, things like WIP, provision, debt provision, expenses, transfer, a range of things, targeted billing, clients, job, data, overtime, casual hours, engagements, engagement budget rates. So a lot of different things. And then you've got different document types, and then showing how that would look within a bootstrap environment. You couldn't really, the thing with this, you couldn't do, you had to do everything perfect. There's no cutting corners. You've got to address everything, from the size of the fonts, what say like the width of the actual the modal, how the modal closes. You've got things like search buttons. You've got things on how you've got things that turn on and off. You've got switches, all those switch options. No check boxes. Everything was either a switch rather than a cog. So it's really something that to look at, and also different icons based on the different scenarios, in terms of say like save searches and all those sorts of things. Everything had to be, you had to look at things very intuitive. This information that I put together, it was presented to the directors of PwC. It had a steering committee, and I had to go through the whole lot. So basically, present it to the BA, and also to the developers. I worked very closely with all of them, and so basically, it was really it was a very successful project, and so it's good to be part of some really good teams, and making sure that you're able to fulfill the goals and the needs and wants for an organisation, especially with PwC being one of the top 50 organisations on the planet. So when you've got that many users, about 190,000 staff, and also with all their clients, when they're logging into something like iPower, it needs to be very intuitive. Usability has to be, top notch. I've had, luckily I've had a lot of experience where I've had millions and millions of clients within the banking industry. This is more in the financial / accounting industry, and it was quite a good experience. So it was very similar to what I was doing for Rubik, to some respect, but also what I was also doing at ComOps, where most of the projects that I've done in the past have been based. I think the last 5 years have been really looking at Bootstrap and seeing how far you can get with Bootstrap. And great using Bootstrap because the turnaround for these projects is just so quick, and it's also you'll find that it's just so good. People like the results. People love how it works. It's clean. It's fast. Everybody loves it. Cheers, guys. Have a good one. Cheers.